And you can go ahead, Rudy, you're live.
Good afternoon, everyone. Uh, Thank you for joining me this afternoon. I want to thank the VBBA for the opportunity to participate in this unique event. I'm really excited that, given the current situation that we are faced with, that we are still able to hold the conference and connect as a community. So this is really important. Before we begin, I would first like to do a brief introduction of my history with vintage baseball. Um, we have the Frias family have been involved in vintage baseball for 28 years. I myself have been playing vintage baseball for 27 years. I started with the junior muffin of the Ohio Village Muffin um, in the early 90s. And it's pretty much what it sounds like. It was a team full of kids that in 96, 97, I started with the Ohio Village Muffins, the men's team. In 1998, I eventually joined the uh, the new club that had formed in Columbus, the Columbus Capitals, which is my current. Um, I played with the Capitals until I moved to Cleveland, and in 2005, I played for the hottest team in Northeast Ohio, the Canal Fulton Mules, and I played with them for a summer. When I moved to New York in 2007 uh, and 2008, I was looking to get into vintage baseball because I knew vintage baseball existed on the East Coast. I had actually made a trip to Old Bethpage in 1998 with the Muffins. And so I was lucky enough to get on the Gotham's Baseball Club, and I played for a summer with that one. Now, we can go into the next slide. Now, before we get into how the podcast came about, you can see there are some pictures of my family's history with the club. Um, and next slide. Now, I decided I was trying to come together with my club in the winter of 2018, and I was trying to figure out how to um, commemorate the 20th summer of vintage baseball for the Columbus Capitals. Um, and, we wanted to do something special. And while I was living in New York, we can go to the next slide, I had discovered Vintage Baseball This Week, which was hosted by Jason Gypsy Cladova. And I was blown away by this. Coming from the Midwest where vintage baseball was a part of my summer every summer, and not exactly being able to participate in vintage baseball as frequently as I had in the past, I found this podcast of his to be like a breath of fresh air. It quenched that thirst that I had for vintage baseball. And so in 2018, I had thought, why not do a podcast for individuals who are familiar with the Columbus Capitals to share what our 20th season would be like, and to share, some of those discussions that you have after a match with your club members. And so I went about and did some research. We can go to the next slide. Um, and it's really interesting because there was a study released recently that, as of last year, there were a total of 850,000 podcasts with an estimated 30 million episodes available for consumption. And I had no idea how to start this podcast. So I reached out to individuals within the community of vintage baseball. I wanted to, do this the right way, if that makes sense. I contacted first Alan Kidd Garcia of the Bay City Independent, and because I knew that he had, done some podcasting in the past, and he might be able to help, steer me in the direction of the type of equipment I would need. And trust me, everyone has a podcast now, so everyone has their specific equipment that they like, and their methods and their mixers, and there's a plethora of information out there and advice. So he really steered me in a direction from just a novice, not having no idea about audio or anything like that. Next slide, please. Now, the equipment that I started with, I wanted to make sure that it was cost effective. I didn't really want to dump a bunch of money in. You can tell by the quality. I didn't really. I wanted to be very user friendly. So in this slide, you can see the little mixer I have right there on the left is your very standard plug into the laptop mixer. It's great for just if you're the one talking. It's also good for if you have an interview or you're calling somebody on the phone or using some sort of video conferencing. The mixer, I believe, is a Behringer. I think that's how it's pronounced. And you can buy it on eBay. It's very simple. The microphones. Now, this is another thing where everybody has their own particular microphone and what they like. I started with like a $30 mic on Amazon. I believe it's up in the upper left-hand corner, the newer. And it came with a package of like an arm and a pop shield. It made me feel really super professional, even if it didn't sound the best. But it was such a good mic to get started with. I have now progressed as I, invested a little bit of money into the podcast, into the two mics at the bottom. Anybody that has done an in-person interview with me has seen this setup and seen these microphones. And I'm a big fan of the Yeti, the blue microphone Yeti there, because it works as a single, just for you to have a conversation, and there's also a feature on it that it does like a conference, so people can just sit around the table and have a conversation, which is essentially what we're capturing with every episode. Next slide, please. I also knew that I wanted to try and get different experiences for people out there in the vintage baseball community. Whether you're on a club or you're new to the whole community, I wanted to get everyone a chance to get a little insight to what goes on into a game. So on the left there, we have your basic lapel mic that you can buy for like $25 on Amazon, and it plugs right into your phone. And you don't need, if you're thinking about starting a podcast, if you want to be 850 one, I would, you can start on your phone. I think it's called Backpack Studio, which is the one on the left there. In the middle is an app that is compatible to iPhones, and you can just plug the mic right into your phone and have a conversation. They give you two mics. You can even have a guest. The sound quality is really great. You can edit it in that app. The one on the right is Anchor, and that's cross-platform, so that's Android and iPhone. And I believe that one is free. So there's a lot of options for people out there to get out there, and it's very simple and very easy. Next slide. So this was the part for anybody out there who's interested in getting a podcast out there. this is the area that requires a little more research. So my episodes aren't live. If you've listened to a podcast episode, or you've been interviewed on in an episode, you understand that there is editing involved. I may make those unedited episodes available to individuals, but as with anything, you want to make sure that you're putting out the best product that you can. So what I use is the free audio software Audacity. And Audacity, you can just download that, and it's very user-friendly, and you can cut out sections of audio that you don't really want to use. Sometimes I podcast from my house, as you can see, in my basement, and my 2-year-old, well now 3-year-old, likes to make an appearance every now and then. Sometimes I have to stop the podcast, the interview, to address his needs, whether it be a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or help on a video game. But, I'd like to cut that out. And through this Audacity software, it's very, very simple. Once you have your episode, once you have what you would like to put out there to the community, there are various platforms that will help you publish a podcast. You really do the research and find out what works best for you. The two that I put up there, Spreaker, Podbean, are the two that I have recently used. I began this podcast with Spreaker, using Spreaker, and I did it because they gave me free, like 50 free hours or something like that, or 5 free hours. And I was like, okay, that's perfect. But I mean, if you want to, as we grew and we expanded past the 2018 season, I knew I was going to need more time available to publish content. So, they offer a plan where you pay like $7-8 a month, and it gives you like 100 hours of publishing. And it's very, once you navigate that platform, you can connect to all the places where you get podcasts from. So you can connect to Apple iTunes, you can connect to Google Play, Spotify, and it's very simple. It's literally a check a box and they send it on out. I've recently switched to Podbean. If you're a listener to the podcast or you're following us on our Facebook page, you can tell that the link is a little different because it's Podbean now. The reason I did that was that Podbean offered a little bit more statistical information on who's listening, when people are listening. Because as I did more research on this, you find out that it takes a little bit. You have to actually kind of plan when you release episodes. Otherwise, people aren't really going to get it, because if you don't want to release an episode at 11 o'clock at night or something like that on a Tuesday. No one's really going to pay attention because they're all asleep for the most part, unless you're on the West Coast. So Podbean is what I use right now, and I'm enjoying it. It's a good process. It's very user-friendly, again, but I encourage anybody who is considering this to do the research, and you can reach out to me and try and steer you in the right direction. Next slide, please. So, when I started the podcast, I decided that I believe in the very first episode, I say this is essentially like an oral history of a vintage club that has been involved in the community for 20 years. I was very upfront with what we weren't, and per se that I am not a historian. I love history, and I love learning about history and vintage baseball history. But I am in no way an authority, and some of the views and opinions shared on episodes aren't historically accurate. And so we're not trying to pass ourselves off as historically accurate in our conversation. But what I wanted to capture is something that I think makes our community incredibly special. And it's talked about quite a bit on our podcast, because we are officially in our second season. I believe I published our 55th episode this past week. So, where our community is much different than your average, like, recreational sporting atmosphere and event. You're not going to find the time to sit down and have a drink or softball or any other rec sport that you participate in. But that is something that is very unique to everything that we offer in vintage baseball. So I wanted to capture that, and I wanted to display that to our community and to anybody out there who is interested in vintage baseball or watches vintage baseball. I feel that it is important for anybody who is starting. If you, as a club, you would like to start a podcast about your club, about your season, I think that is fantastic. It helps individuals across the country connect with you and learn more about your club. I suggest that if you are going to do this, these are my tips. The first thing I would do is after you figure out the equipment and all the technical stuff you would like to have, you need to figure out who you're going to reach out to through this process, correct? So, like, people who listen to the Vintage Baseball podcast, it's not just me. Sometimes it is me because it's hard to align schedules for everyone, but I have my brothers, Kid Frias and Dynamite Frias on a lot. I have Mouse Klein, some of you are familiar with, Tool Dowdy. I have various people from the Capitals on, and then I reach out to our community. I make it an effort to include the people that I just love talking to during the game and after the game, and I want them on. I want to talk to, I want to get their thoughts. A few presenters today have actually been guests on the podcast. I encourage you to go listen to those. And so figure out who you would like to be on, and then come up with topics that are relevant to you and the community. So, like, if you get on and you start talking about aluminum siding, you're not really going to capture a lot of people in the vintage baseball community. I started keeping a book. This is like a journal of every episode that I've done. And in this, I write down the topic of the episode. What is the overall topic? And then I break it down into questions, because I believe, we learn by asking questions. We how else are we going to grow as a community if not asking questions, correct? So I like to write down all of my questions that I would like to be presented in the episode. And once you have that, hit record and just start talking. It is, it's amazing just the conversations that you have, how many people will relate to you. And that's how I feel every episode. I think back to working in the Brooklyn Navy Yard in the summer of 2008, and listening to Vintage Baseball This Week by Gypsy, and just being like, I don't know the specific clubs he is talking about, but man, I relate to that, and I connect to that. And it meant a lot to me then, and it was something that, I kept in constant rotation. And so we have an opportunity, especially now during these times. We're not 100% certain what 2020 will look like in our community. So this is a time for us to find different ways to connect and engage and include each other across the country and include and reach out and grow an audience. And I think this is a really unique way to do that. We may not be able to connect physically and be on the field together, but we can still have that connection. And I feel that the podcast is a very easy and accessible way to do that. So how you can find the Vintage Baseball Podcast. You can go on the Facebook. We are on Facebook. You can email us at the Vintage Baseball Podcast at gmail.com. And we have a question, and I will take that question.
Hey, Rudy. This is Matt Brandywine.
Hey, Matt.
Hey. I was curious about how you might go about funding a podcast. Have you considered not necessarily sponsorship so much, but reaching out to the community and seeing if anybody would be willing to donate to you to try to help you a little bit? I understand that there are several podcasts that I listen to that they have these one-time payment options through PayPal, or you could spend $1 or $2 like once a month through something called Patreon. I was just wondering if you had considered something like that.
I have considered that. So that's a fantastic question. Thanks, Matt. Good to talk to you. It's good to see you today. So yeah, we've reached out. We've been contacted by various breweries here in the city. I believe we did a few episodes from Lineage Brewery here in Columbus, Ohio, and we've been in discussions for just a season sponsorship and what that would look like, as far as and you can get sponsored through the platforms that publish your podcast, like Spreaker and Podbean. They choose what the advertisement will be, but you also have to, if you don't meet the minimum requirement for downloads. I think the last time I looked, it was like you have to average 1,000 downloads an episode for it to actually work in your favor. I switched to Podbean recently, and they have a Patreon option where you can set up a Patreon page and people can donate to your podcast. It actually, some podcasts, because I'm listening to a lot of podcasts these days. Podcasts offer extra special content to Patreon subscribers, and these are individuals like you said will set up a donation. It's kind of like an NPR fund drive to support the podcast. And these are also avenues that you can look into if this is something you're interested in. Yeah. Any other questions?
Well, if nobody else is going to chime in.
Rudy.
Yay. Hi.
Rudy, this is Jim Kimnack.
Hi, Mr. Kimnack.
I just want to thank you for all your work that you've done with Vintage Baseball Podcast. I also wanted people to know that because of your outstanding work with Vintage Baseball Podcast, that Rudy was the 2019 recipient of our Ohio Village Muffins Henry Chadwick Award for outstanding contributions to the vintage baseball community. So congratulations again on that. And I think I see it in the background behind you, up against the wall. Talk to you later.
That's true, yes. I was extremely honored to receive this award. For individuals who aren't familiar with this award, my mom and dad won this award. It is a very prestigious award within the Ohio Village Muffin community. I was super surprised, and I may have strategically took it off the wall over there and put it back here for this particular occasion. I think that this is not something that is requires a lot of technical knowledge. It is something that is very easy. You can literally do it from your phone, and everyone has a story to share, and vintage baseball is about sharing stories. Honestly, you're sharing the story of the history of a game that we all love, and I think that it's everybody should be able to share their story.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Rudy, this is Corky, if you can hear me.
Hey, Corky.
Hey, you mentioned earlier when you switched over to Podbean, it was better with statistics. What, if you are willing to share, what kind of numbers are you looking at on average for listeners each podcast? And I know it varies, but where are you at on average?
We are currently averaging 50 downloads an episode, like right off the bat in the first day. And then it grows gradually as, your audience, they consume that. I felt with Spreaker's very good. What I felt with that platform was that they just gave you a general overview of your daily downloads, of what your downloads look like over the course of the day, the month, the year. And Podbean offered a more dedicated, I can see downloads from different states in the U.S. And that really, I think, is super helpful because it can help you kind of tailor an episode to a state that has, a lot of listeners, to get them engaged. We want to be inclusive in our community and engaging, and that's what I try to do here. So with, I was a little hesitant, I'm not going to lie, because I wasn't sure how to. It took me a while. I've been considering switching for a while, but I was worried. I was like, are my numbers going to shift? Is this going to, am I going to confuse a lot of people? Is this going to be hard to get? For the most part, it seems to have been successful. But, we, I think overall total with Spreaker and Podbean numbers, I think we're about at, 6,200 total downloads for the whole podcast. So.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Rudy, it looks like that's it on the calls. So if you want to share something else, then you can use the rest of your time to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you. And, I briefly before I get off to go, it's a pleasure to be able to do this. I clearly I stand on a foundation that was laid out before me, and to everyone out there in the community, East Coast, Midwest, West Coast, Central, everywhere, I really would love the chance to share your story, to talk to you, to engage with you, and everyone else would love to hear it. I always end the podcast with saying that, that we should, keep it station to station, and I'll see you out in the field. And I know that currently there are a lot of vintage games and events being canceled, and a lot of opening days are being pushed way back, and a lot of uncertainty. I think, this is the time where we should, lean on each other and connect with one another in order to get a better understanding of our game, and to commiserate and have a drink with individuals that you normally wouldn't get the chance to. So on behalf of myself and everybody associated with the Vintage Baseball Podcast, I really, really cannot thank the VBBA enough for allowing me this time to share with you this process. And I can't thank everybody enough out there watching. I'll hold for your applause. To take the time today and be a part of this amazing event. So with that, stay safe out there, everyone. Keep it station to station. I'll see you out in the field.